I would like to go over two items that I would like particularly new entrants to the stock market to ponder just a bit before they try and do 30 or 40 trades a day in order to profit from what looks like a very easy game. So I ran off a list of the 20 largest companies in the world by market value on March 31st. And if you look at the top 20 from 1989, there's two things that should grab your interest. None of the 20 from 30 years ago are on the present list. None. Zero. But what I would like you to do is look at that list and then make an estimate how many of those companies are going to be on the list 30 years from now. What would you guess?
Take a look at this comparison showing the world's top 20 largest companies from 1989 versus today. Notice how none of the original giants are still on the list, while tech companies that didn't even exist back then now dominate the rankings. This pattern explains why Warren Buffett believes that most investors fail at stock picking. Even when you invest in today's most powerful companies, there's no guarantee that they'll maintain their market leadership, as completely new players can emerge to dominate entire industries. This wasn't just trivia. It was Buffett delivering one of his most important warnings about the dangers of overconfidence in investing. What he revealed in that meeting about corporate mortality and market unpredictability challenges everything most people know about picking winning stocks. If you want to understand why even the smartest investors struggle to beat the market, you absolutely must see this legendary presentation. Let's hear what he has to say.
I would like to go over two items that I would like particularly new entrants to the stock market to ponder just a bit before they try and do 30 or 40 trades a day in order to profit from what looks like a very easy game. So I ran off a list of the 20 largest companies in the world, but the top 6 companies, in the whole world, 5 of them are in the United States. But what I would like you to do is look at that list and then make an estimate how many of those companies are going to be on the list 30 years from now. What would you guess? Think about that yourself. Would you put on 5, 8? Well, whatever it would be. I would now invite you to look at slide 2, or L2, which goes back a little more than 30 years, and look at the top 20 from 1989. And if you look at the top 20 from 1989, there's two things that should grab your interest, at least 2. None of the 20 from 30 years ago are on the present list. None. Zero. There were then 6 U.S. companies on the list, and their names are familiar to you. We have General Electric, we have Exxon, we have IBM Corp. I mean, they're still around. Merck has done their number. None made it to the list 30 years later, 0. And I would guess that very few of you, when I asked you to play the quiz a few minutes ago, would have put down 0. And I don't think it will be 0. But it is a reminder of what extraordinary things can happen. Things that seem obvious to you. Japan had this wonderful bull market for a very long time, so you had a number of Japanese companies on the list. Today there are none. And the United States had the 6, now we have 13. But they aren't the same 6.
To grasp why Buffett believes that timing the market is futile, we first need to understand corporate mortality. The idea that business dominance is temporary, which means that if we can't predict which giants will survive the next 30 years, we certainly cannot predict what stocks will do tomorrow. Think about this for a second. What if I told you that every single one of today's biggest, most powerful companies will likely be forgotten or irrelevant in just 30 years? It sounds crazy, right? But here's the thing, it already happened. Corporate mortality is simply the idea that even the most dominant companies eventually lose their throne, and it happens way more often than you think. Today's corporate giants, Apple, Google, Amazon, they weren't even players 30 years ago. Meanwhile, the companies everyone thought were permanent fixtures, they vanished from the top entirely. Back in 1989, if you asked anyone to name the companies that would dominate forever, they'd confidently point to the top 3, the Industrial Bank of Japan, the Sumitomo Bank, and the Fuji Bank. These weren't just big companies. They were institutions controlling global finance. Japan's economy was booming, and these banking giants represented 11 out of top 20 companies in the world. They seemed unstoppable. Today, Industrial Bank of Japan and Fuji Bank merged to form Mizuho Financial Group, and while it's still one of Japan's largest banks by assets, ranking around 14th to 23rd globally, its market value tells a different story. By market capitalization, Mizuho ranks somewhere between 250th and 300th in the world. These former titans went from dominating the top 20 to being mid-tier players that most people outside of finance never even heard of. Understanding corporate mortality is just the beginning, but what Buffett reveals next about the explosive growth in company valuations will blow your mind. The numbers he's about to share are so staggering, they'll make you question whether this level of wealth creation can possibly continue. Let's hear what he has to say.
I would invite you to think about one other thing as you look at this list. 1989 was not the dark ages. I mean, we weren't just discovering capitalism or anything else. And people thought they knew a lot about the stock market, and the efficient market theory was in, and it was not a backward time. And if you look, the top company at that time had a market value of 100 billion, 104 billion. So the largest company in the world, title, in just a shade over 30 years, has gone from 100 billion to 2 trillion. At the bottom, the number 20 has gone from 34 billion to something a little over 10 times that. Well, that tells you something about what's happened with equality, which is a hot subject in this country. It tells you a little bit about inflation, but this was not a highly inflationary period as a whole. But it tells you that capitalism has worked incredibly well, especially for the capitalists. And it's a pretty astounding number. Do you think it could be repeated now that 30 years from now that you could take 2 trillion for Apple and multiply any company and come up with 30 times that for the leader? It seems impossible, and maybe it is impossible, but we were just as sure of ourselves as investors and Wall Street was in 1989 as we are today. But the world can change in very, very dramatic ways.
To grasp why Buffett believes that we might be approaching the impossible, we first need to understand exponential wealth growth and how market valuations have exploded, because this level of wealth creation is so extreme that it may be mathematically unsustainable. Imagine you bought a house for $100,000 in 1989, and by 2025 it was worth $2 million. You would think that's absolutely incredible, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to the world's biggest companies. Except we're not talking about hundreds of thousands, we are talking about hundreds of billions. Exponential wealth growth is when something doesn't just get bigger, it gets bigger at an accelerating rate, creating mind-blowing numbers that seem almost impossible to believe. Here's what actually happened. In 1989, the world's largest company was worth about 100 billion. That's already a massive number and more money than most countries have. But fast forward to just 36 years to 2025, and the largest company, Nvidia, is worth over $4 trillion. That's 40 times bigger. This isn't just about big numbers getting bigger. This exponential wealth growth explains why some people have become unimaginably wealthy while others got left behind. If you owed Apple stock in 1989 and you held on to it, you didn't just make money, you made generational wealth. But if you were working a regular job, your salary definitely didn't multiply by 20 times. The crazy part, Buffett is asking whether this can possibly continue. Can Apple go from 3.8 trillion to 38 trillion in next 30 years? At some point, the math just stops making sense. There isn't enough money in the entire world economy for that to happen. Understanding exponential wealth growth is crucial if you want to make money investing, but Buffett reveals there's one simple strategy that could have captured all this incredible growth without picking a single winner. What he shares next will completely shatter the myth that you need to be a stock-picking genius to get rich. Let's hear what he has to say.
And I'll just give you one other example you might ponder. This is when you start feeling too sure of yourself. One thing it shows, incidentally, is that it's a great argument for index funds is that the main thing to do was to be aboard the ship, a ship. They were all going to a better promised land. You just didn't know which one was the one they'd necessarily get on. But you couldn't help but do well if you just had a diversified group of equities. U.S. equities would be my preference, but to hold over a 30-year period. But if you thought you knew a lot about which ones to pick, or the person that you had hiring, you were paying a lot of money to, had all these ideas, and they could tell you their best ideas, and 1989 did not necessarily do that well, although overall equities were absolutely the place to be.
To understand why Buffett argues for index funds or trying to pick individual winners, we need to grasp the difference between these two approaches, and why most investors destroy their wealth by believing that they are smarter than the market. Imagine you're standing at a harbor watching dozens of ships set sail for a distant, incredibly wealthy land. You know that the land exists, and you know that most of these ships will eventually make it there and bring back treasure. But there's a catch. You have no idea which ship will be the fastest, which captain the best, and which one might hit a storm along the way. You have two choices. You can try to pick the best ship and put all your money on it, or you can buy a small piece of every ship in the fleet. That's essentially the difference between stock picking and index fund investing. Stock picking is like betting everything on one or two ships because you think you can spot the winners. Maybe the captain looks confident, or the ship appears sturdy, or someone gave you a hot tip about which route is the fastest. It feels exciting and smart, and after all, if you pick the right ship, you'll make way more money than everyone else. Index fund investing is like buying a tiny piece of every ship at the harbor. It might sound boring, but there's the beautiful part to it. You don't need to be right about which ship wins. As long as the fleet reaches the wealthy land, and historically it almost always does, you're guaranteed to participate in the success. Here's what's crazy. Even the experts who spend their entire careers studying stocks consistently fail to pick the winning ones. Professional fund managers routinely get beaten by simple index funds that just own a piece of everything. Buffett's point is brilliant. Instead of trying to outsmart the market by picking individual winners, just own the whole market. You'll capture all the growth and probably end up wealthier than people who think they can beat the system. Understanding this difference is crucial for successful investing, but Buffett warns about an even more dangerous trap: chasing hot industries and trending sectors. What he reveals next about why even obvious, world-changing industries can destroy your wealth will absolutely shock you. Let's hear what he has to say.
Secondly, people get enormously attracted to various industries. I mean, they think if you know, if a company says it's in the XYZ industry and that's a popular one, you can sell IPOs, you can sell SPACs, people disregard sales numbers, earnings numbers. It's just, it's the place to be. So, Berkshire Hathaway, where was the place to be in 1903 when my dad was born in 1903, but that wasn't really that big of news. But it wasn't big news that actually Henry Ford was starting the Ford Motor Company. He'd failed a couple of times before, but he was about to change the world. I mean, the auto, when you think about everything, we've got a great auto insurance company. If there weren't any autos, we wouldn't have Geico. But it's transformed the country. And Henry Ford brought in the $5 daily wage, and that was a huge thing. Assembly lines, everything, autos came along. So let's just assume that you had seen a quick glance back in 1903 of all the interstate highways, 290 million vehicles on the road in the United States, everything about it. And you say, well, this is pretty easy. It's going to be cars. It's going to be autos. Let's just assume that you decided that autos were this incredible thing, and someday there'd be an Indianapolis 500, and someday they'd have a review mirrors on cars, and someday 290 million cars would be buzzing around the United States, or autos, or the county trucks there. And so I decided to look at the history, and I thought I'd put up the list of auto companies from over the years. And I was originally going to put up just the ones that were the M's so I could get them on one slide. But when I went to the M's, it went on and on and on. So I just decided to put up the ones that started with MA. And as you can see, there were almost 40 companies that went into the auto business, just starting with MA, including our Marmon there in the middle column, and which lasted for a while, quite a while. But it was selling cars in the 1930s were really quite special. But in any event, there were at least 2,000 companies that entered the auto business because they clearly had this incredible future. And of course, you remember that in 2009, there were 3 left, 2 of which went bankrupt. So there is a lot more to picking stocks than figuring out what's going to be a wonderful industry in the future. The Maytag company put out a car. Allstate put out a car. DuPont put out a car. I mean, there was a Nebraska Motor Company. Everybody started car companies, just like everybody's starting something now that can be where you can get money from people. But there were very, very, very few people that picked the winner or got the opportunity for that. At Ford Motor, Henry Ford had a few partners, and he really didn't like them, so he figured a way to buy them out. That was sort of the sort of the beginning of the auto finance. That's a long story. We won't get into that. But you couldn't buy into Ford Motor, and of course General Motors became the dominant company. Finding when Henry Ford did not really make the shift from the Model T to the Model A it did not work very well. So I just want to tell you, it's not as easy as it sounds.
To understand why Buffett warns against chasing hot industries and trendy sectors, we need to grasp the difference between industry growth and individual company profits, because this confusion has bankrupted countless investors who were right about the future but wrong about which companies would survive. Here's one of the biggest mistakes investors make. They think that if they can spot the next big industry, they're guaranteed to get rich. And it sounds logical, right? If you had known in 1903 that cars would completely transform the world, you would just buy a car company stocks and become wealthy. Problem solved. Except that's not how it works at all. Imagine you're in 1903 and you have the perfect vision for the future. You can see the interstate highways, the 290 million cars on American roads, everything that cars would create. You're absolutely certain that cars are going to be huge, so you decide to invest in a car companies. Here's what have actually happened. You'd probably have gone broke. Why? Because even though you were 100% right about the industry, most individual car companies failed spectacularly. At one point, there were over 2,000 automobile manufacturers in the United States. Today, we basically have 3 major ones left. That means that about 99% of car companies went out of business, even though the automobile industry became one of the most important industries in human history. The seductive part is that it feels so obvious when you're looking at a transformative industry. Your brain tricks you into thinking, this is easy money, I just need to buy into this hot sector. But industry growth and individual company success are 2 completely different things. Being right about the future of an entire industry doesn't guarantee you'll pick the surviving companies within that industry. And this brings us to the full circle of everything Buffett has been teaching us. Think about what we've uncovered today. Corporate mortality shows that even the mightiest companies, those Japanese baking giants that dominated in the 1989, eventually fall from grace. We saw how market valuations have exploded from 100 billion to 4 trillion in just 36 years, raising questions whether this growth can continue forever. We learned why trying to pick individual winning stocks is a fool's game, and Even professional fund managers who spend their entire careers analyzing companies consistently get beaten by simple index funds that just own a piece of everything. And finally, with the automotive industry example, we saw the ultimate trap. Even when you're absolutely right about the future and you identify a transformative industry, you can still go broke trying to pick the surviving companies. Remember, 2,000 car companies once existed and 99% of them failed, despite being what became one of the most successful industries in human history. These are not separate lessons. They're all pointing to the same fundamental truth. The market is far more unpredictable than we think, and our confidence in our ability to outsmart it is dangerously misplaced. This wisdom comes from someone who built Berkshire Hathaway into a $1 trillion company over the last 60 years, delivering nearly 20% annual returns by embracing humility over hubris. The key takeaway is simple. Instead of trying to outsmart the market by timing it, picking individual stocks, or chasing hot sectors, focus on broad diversification through index funds and long-term thinking. As Buffett himself says, time is the friend of the wonderful business, the enemy of the mediocre.